I never thought my daughter's wedding would be the place I'd have to watch her heart break all over again. It started with a champagne glass tapping gently against a plate. Carter stood up. He smiled, that fake courtroom smile of his, the one he wore when he wanted people to think he still mattered. "I'm paying for this," he said, raising his glass, "so I'll speak." The room hushed. People turned their heads, half curious, half uneasy. Felt my stomach twist. He'd already been cold all morning, checking his watch more than he checked on his daughter. He began with pleasantries, a joke about how long the ceremony was, something light about the food. Guests laughed. My daughter, Lila, smiled politely. I could see it wasn't real. Then his voice shifted. "Lila's grown into a beautiful woman," he said. "She's smart, strong, and hopefully," he turned toward the groom, "her new husband can handle damaged goods." Laughter. Actual laughter. Small, awkward, confused, but real. Lila froze. Her hand stopped midair, holding her wine glass just below her lips. Her eyes didn't move, just locked on nothing. I felt the rage crawl up my throat. I pushed back my chair. I was ready to stand, to say something, to scream if I had to. No one, not even him, was going to humiliate my daughter like that. But before I could speak, Elias moved. He didn't say a word. He just walked slowly across the floor, steady as ever. When he reached Lila, he knelt beside her and handed her a folded letter. She looked at him, eyes wide and glassy. He didn't explain. He just said, "He doesn't deserve this moment. Read it." The room fell into silence so deep it felt like everyone forgot how to breathe. Lila always imagined her wedding day as a kind of homecoming, not to a place but to a feeling she had only known in pieces. Safety, celebration, being surrounded by people who loved her without condition. For months, she planned every detail: the soft blush flowers, the live jazz quartet, the garden archway her stepfather built by hand. It wasn't just a wedding. It was her moment to step into a future that finally felt like hers. That morning, she was radiant. Her dress flowed like it belonged in a dream. When I helped zip up the back, she looked over her shoulder in the mirror and said, "Do I look okay?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You look like everything good in this world," I said, and I meant every word. She had been through more than most women her age. She deserved peace, laughter, and a room full of people who saw her as whole. She especially deserved a father who would protect that moment, not try to steal it. Carter hadn't been that father for a long time. When Lila was 12, he left, one of those slow exits disguised as ambition. More meetings, more hours at the firm, more nights he didn't come home. Eventually, he moved out and told her it was best this way. Then he stopped calling. No explanation, just absence. What hurt Lila most wasn't that he left. It was that when he did show up, birthdays, graduations, he treated her like a prop in some redemption story he never earned. When I met Elias, I wasn't looking for a second chance at love. I was focused on raising my daughter and trying to keep the pieces from cutting us too deep. But Elias was steady in a way I hadn't known before, kind, quiet, and deeply present. He never tried to replace Carter. He just showed up. The first time he helped Lila with her math homework, he sat for 2 hours while she cried in frustration. He didn't flinch. He didn't quit. He just stayed. By the time she was 14, she stopped calling him Elias and started calling him Dad. She did it on her own, no push from me, no awkward conversation. Just one day, she walked into the kitchen, pointed at a drawing she made for school, and said, "I made this for Dad." And he smiled without blinking, like he had always been waiting for her to say it. So when Lila got engaged, it made sense that Elias would walk her down the aisle. She asked him with a handwritten note. He read it in silence, nodded, and pulled her into the kind of hug only a real father knows how to give. Carter wasn't happy, but he didn't say much. Instead, he offered to pay for the wedding. He said it was the least he could do. I should have known that phrase wasn't generosity. It was a warning. Lila was hesitant. I remember her asking me, "Do you think it's a trap?" And I said, "Honey, it doesn't matter who pays. What matters is who's there when it counts." She nodded, but I could see the uncertainty still flickering behind her eyes. The day of the wedding, Carter arrived late. His tie was too loose, his cologne too strong. He shook hands with people he barely remembered and smiled like he was the one giving her away. I stayed out of his way. I didn't want a scene. I just wanted the day to go smoothly for Lila. As the ceremony began, Elias stood beside her at the back of the aisle. He looked calm, but I could see the emotion in his eyes. The music started. She reached out and took his arm, and the way she looked at him, that small, grateful glance, said everything. She walked toward her future, holding on to the man who had actually walked with her through life. The ceremony went perfectly. Vows, rings, the kiss. Everyone clapped, even Carter, though he didn't look like he meant it. At the reception, Lila twirled across the dance floor with Jonah, her new husband, laughing in the kind of full-bodied way that made people fall in love with her. For a moment, I let myself believe Carter would stay quiet, that maybe, for once, he'd understand this wasn't about him. I was wrong, because when he stood up to give his toast, I saw that old glint in his eyes, the one that said he wasn't here to celebrate her. He was here to remind her who used to hold the power. And in that moment, everything began to unravel. The room was glowing. Candles flickered on every table. Lila was laughing, cheeks flushed from dancing, her hand wrapped around Jonah's as they whispered to each other between bites of cake. Her veil had been tucked away, but the pins still shimmered in her hair. She looked like she had finally stepped into her own life. Elias and I stood off to the side, watching her. We weren't the kind of parents who hovered, but we knew how much this day meant, not just for her, but for us too. We had waited years to see her safe, joyful, unburdened. I leaned into Elias and said, "We did it." He just smiled, one of those small smiles that said everything without a word. Then we heard it, the sound of a champagne flute tapping against the side of a plate. It was sharp, too sharp, the kind of sound that slices through 100 conversations at once. Carter was standing. He held his glass high and wore that crooked smile I'd seen 100 times in courtrooms and conference rooms, the kind of smile that says he's not here to share, he's here to perform. "I'm paying for this," he said, scanning the room, "so I'll speak." Lila froze. Her head turned slowly toward him. Jonah reached for her hand, sensing something had shifted. A few guests gave polite applause, assuming a father's toast would be sweet, maybe emotional. I knew better. I felt the skin on the back of my neck tighten. Carter cleared his throat. "First of all," he said, "what a beautiful evening. The food, the music, my compliments to whoever chose the open bar. Laughter, the light kind. People relaxing, waiting for the emotional part." He turned toward Lila and Jonah, eyes gleaming. "I just want to say how proud I am of my daughter. She's grown into a strong, impressive woman. She's been through a lot." He paused. "A whole lot. And hopefully her new husband can handle damaged goods." Silence. Then a few short, uncertain laughs. The kind of laughter people give when they're not sure if something was meant to be funny. I saw faces twist in confusion, embarrassment, discomfort. Lila didn't laugh. She didn't blink. Her body stiffened as if she'd been slapped in front of everyone. My heart cracked open. That wasn't a joke. That was a wound Carter had been waiting to reopen for years, and he did it in front of everyone she loved, at her wedding, in a room where she should have felt untouchable. I stood. My body moved before my mind caught up. I wasn't going to let him have the last word. Not again. Not here. I didn't care that people were watching. I didn't care that it was his money on the bill. I would burn the whole night down if it meant shielding her from that kind of cruelty. Then I felt a hand on my wrist. Elias. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He gave me one look, and I knew. He had this. And more importantly, Lila needed him more than she needed me in that moment. He walked forward, quiet but certain. The kind of walk that made people move out of his way without thinking. He reached Lila's table and knelt beside her. Her face was still pale, her jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch near her ear. He whispered something I couldn't hear. Then he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and placed it in her hand. She looked at it, confused. He whispered again, just one sentence. "He doesn't deserve this moment. Read it." The entire room watched in complete silence. Even Carter sat back down, slowly, eyes narrowing in irritation. He hadn't expected to be challenged. He never does. Not by me, not by anyone. Certainly not by the man who had quietly replaced him in every way that ever mattered. Lila's fingers shook slightly as she unfolded the letter. Jonah reached for her hand again, grounding her. I held my breath. So did everyone else. Something had shifted. You could feel it. The music had stopped. Glasses sat untouched. The air had weight. No one was sure what was happening, but we all knew something important was about to be said. Something real. And for the first time that day, Carter wasn't in control. Lila looked down at the folded paper in her hand like it might burn her fingers. Her lashes fluttered, but she didn't blink. Her throat moved as she swallowed, slow and stiff. Then she unfolded the letter. The paper made a soft sound as it opened, but it was the loudest thing in the room. Every fork, every whisper, every breath had stopped. She took one last glance at Elias, still kneeling beside her, then rose from her seat. Her chair scraped gently against the floor as she stood. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The quiet in the room made it feel amplified, sharp and trembling all at once. She began to read. To my daughter, you are not damaged. You are healing. There is a difference, and it matters. Her voice caught for half a second, but she kept going. You were never broken. You were growing. The pain you carried was never yours to begin with. It came from silence, from absence, from promises made and then taken back without explanation. The guests leaned in. Every word landed like stone in water. Ripples moved across the faces in the crowd, bridesmaids, old neighbors, distant relatives, all watching this young woman unravel and rebuild in real time. I have watched you try to make sense of why he wasn't there. I saw you wait for calls that didn't come. I saw you smile through tears when he missed birthdays, performances, your first college visit, and I saw the way you still hoped. You always hoped. Her hands gripped the letter tighter. Aaliyah stood slowly behind her, not close enough to interrupt, but close enough to be steady if she faltered. You asked me once if it made sense to keep hoping, if it was foolish to keep loving someone who forgot to love you back. I didn't know how to answer then, but I do now. It wasn't foolish. It was brave. Because you never gave up on the idea that you were worth loving. She glanced toward Carter. He didn't move. His expression was frozen somewhere between a frown and disbelief. He wasn't used to being addressed like this, certainly not publicly, not by his own daughter. She continued, Carter Halden paid for this wedding. He paid for the venue, the food, the music, and I'm sure he'll remind people of that for years to come. But love isn't paid for with checks. It's paid for with presence. Lila's voice grew stronger, like each sentence built a platform beneath her feet. The man who stood beside me today is the man who stayed. He stayed when I cried over boys and school and college rejection letters. He stayed when I panicked about growing up. He was there at every softball game, every science fair, every small moment that didn't need to be big to matter. She paused just long enough for the air to settle. He never asked me to call him Dad. He earned it. A quiet gasp rippled through the crowd. No drama, just truth. And to my husband, Jonah, she said, turning slightly, this is the family you're marrying into. Not perfect, but real. Not loud, but loyal. Jonah stood up and wrapped an arm around her waist. She let the letter fall to the table. Elias reached out and placed a hand on her back. It wasn't staged. It wasn't meant for an audience. It was what family looks like when no one's watching. People began to clap, soft at first, then louder, not the usual applause you hear at speeches. This wasn't polite, it was grateful, honest, necessary. Carter sat motionless. He looked smaller now, not humiliated, just irrelevant. He had walked into that room believing he still had power over her, and in under 5 minutes, she showed him he never did. Lila turned to Elias and whispered something only he could hear. He smiled, eyes wet but proud. He didn't need credit. He never had. I looked around the room and saw what I had prayed for since Lila was a girl. No shame, no doubt, no ache that she couldn't name. Just light, finally unfiltered. She had spoken, and now she was free. She was. When Lila finished reading the letter, she stood perfectly still. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice never cracked. She didn't look to the crowd for approval. She didn't glance at Carter again. She didn't need to. The letter had done what years of silence never could. It gave voice to the ache she carried, and it made something undeniably clear to every single person in that room. Carter Halden was no longer the father in her story. The applause grew, not wild or chaotic. It was thoughtful, deliberate, rising like a wave. I saw faces soften, tears wiped away discreetly. A few people who had laughed during Carter's toast now looked at the floor. Some exchanged quiet glances, uncomfortable with what they had just been part of. The atmosphere had changed. This wasn't a party anymore. It was something deeper. Jonah leaned in and kissed Lila on the forehead. She smiled, but her eyes didn't leave Elias. She stepped toward him, arms open. He met her halfway. Their embrace was slow and full. Elias pulled her into his chest and held her with both arms wrapped tightly around her. He didn't speak. He just pressed his hand gently against the back of her head like he used to when she was little and scared. Her body sank into his like she had finally found where she belonged. The applause softened and faded into silence. Carter stood. Whether it was instinct or ego, I'll never know. He adjusted his jacket and cleared his throat like he was about to explain something. The kind of self-important gesture I'd seen too many times in courtrooms and company parties. But this time, no one looked at him. The microphone was still on the table. He reached for it, hesitated, then pulled his hand back. There was no recovering from this, no joke to ease the tension, no smooth transition to charm his way back into the spotlight. He picked up his drink and took a sip. No one toasted back. A few guests turned their chairs away. Some glanced toward the dance floor. One of the groomsmen stood and walked over to the bar, deliberately cutting off Carter's line of sight. He wasn't the center of the room anymore. He wasn't even part of the room. He had become the background noise, the hum of an old song no one listens to, only hears. Carter didn't storm out. That would have drawn attention. He hated losing control, but he hated being pitied more. So he did what men like him do when they're cornered. He disappeared. Quietly, with a forced smile, he slipped out the side door near the terrace. I watched him walk into the night like a man stepping away from a house he didn't build and never really lived in. Lila watched him go, but there was no pain in her eyes, only relief. She exhaled once, slow and clean, and turned back toward Jonah. Then something beautiful happened. The music returned. Not loud or jarring, just a gentle melody from the jazz band, something slow and warm, like the air had finally remembered how to breathe. Jonah led Lila back to the dance floor. Elias returned to my side, his arm resting softly around my back. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. People began to dance again. Slowly at first, unsure of how to restart joy after such stillness. But joy, when it's real, knows how to find its way back. Leela laughed at something Jonah whispered. Her face opened up like the sun breaking through a storm. I hadn't seen that kind of laughter from her in years, maybe ever. She wasn't faking it anymore. She had walked through fire in front of everyone she loved. And instead of shrinking, she stood taller. Instead of being humiliated, she found power. Not in revenge, not in shouting, but in truth. Real truth doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need a microphone or a stage. It just needs to be spoken once, clearly and without apology. That was the moment she stopped being the girl who had been left behind. She became the woman who chose herself. And Carter? He became what he always feared most, unnecessary. The night ended with Lila barefoot on the grass, her heels in one hand and a sparkler in the other. The guests were laughing again, this time without hesitation. The dance floor glowed under string lights. Plates had been cleared, champagne had run dry, and the air had shifted from ceremony to celebration. Lila walked toward me as the last song faded. Her makeup had smudged slightly from the tears, but she had never looked more alive. She hugged me so tightly I felt her heartbeat against mine. I held her close, longer than usual. She pulled back just enough to look me in the eye and said, "Thank you for never letting me believe I was what he made me feel like." I didn't answer with words. I just cupped her face in my hands and kissed her forehead. She didn't need a speech. She had given enough of those for one day. She had done what many grown women spend a lifetime trying to do. She stood in front of the wound and said, "This is not my fault." Elias walked up a moment later, quiet as always, holding her bouquet and smiling like a man who had just watched his daughter win something bigger than applause. She reached for him without hesitation and leaned into his chest like she had 100 times before. He rested his chin on the top of her head. I watched them and felt something tighten in my throat. This was the man who showed up when it counted, the man who stayed, the man who never asked for anything but gave everything. Lila never needed to call him Dad for him to be one. Later that evening, as the guests began to leave and the venue dimmed its lights, Jonah came over and thanked us, not just for the wedding or for raising Lila, but for what happened after the toast. He said, "Most people don't get to marry someone who already knows how to stand up for herself. You gave me a woman who knows her worth." That sentence stayed with me. People spend years trying to untangle themselves from the stories others wrote for them, stories about who they are, what they're worth, what they deserve. Carter tried to write one of those stories for Lila, but she tore it up in front of him, and in doing so, she gave herself a new ending, one that was honest, one that was hers. As for Carter, we haven't heard from him since that night. He didn't call. He didn't write. And that silence, for once, wasn't painful. It was peaceful. Not all absences are wounds. Some are gifts. In the weeks after the wedding, people kept calling, texting, writing notes. Some apologized for laughing. Others said they had never seen anything so brave. A few said they'd never be able to look at Carter the same way. I didn't respond to most of it. That moment wasn't about their guilt or their reflection. It was about Lila's freedom. She and Jonah went on their honeymoon a few days later. She called from the airport before they boarded. Her voice was calm, steady. She sounded lighter. I asked how she felt. She said, "I don't think I ever realized how much I was still carrying until I finally put it down." That's what healing sounds like. It doesn't always come in silence or solitude. Sometimes it comes in front of 100 people, in a borrowed microphone with a shaking hand and a steady heart. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a reckoning, a release, a reclaiming of identity. People say blood is thicker than water, but they forget that love is thicker than both. Elias wasn't Lila's father by blood, but he was there. Every day, in every way that mattered. And when the moment came to choose who she believed in, she chose him. That's what real love looks like. What happened at my daughter's wedding wasn't just a moment. It was a reminder. You are not defined by the people who fail you. You are not broken because someone else walked away. And you are never, ever damaged goods. You are worthy of love that shows up, love that listens, love that stays. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own journey or someone you care about, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. I read them, and so do others who are healing too. And if you want more stories about love, resilience, and finding your voice, subscribe to the channel. We're building a community where no one has to heal alone. Thank you for watching. You matter. You always did. Ooh.